The story of Richard III and William Catesby allegedly had it all: murder, treason, betrayal, war, and even disputes over incest. Yet, none of these dramatic elements were arguably the reason why Catesby, one of Richard's closest surviving advisors, faced immediate execution at the insistence of Henry VII. This decision, made with apparent conviction by the first Tudor king, sealed Catesby's fate. Surprisingly, Catesby is almost forgotten today. His most enduring claim to fame in modern times is a lampoon written by the Tudor supporter William Collingbourne, who displayed it on the door of St. Paul's Cathedral in July 1484. "The Cate, the Ratter, and Lovell our Dogger, ruleth all Englander under a hogger." In this satirical verse, Catesby is the cat, Richard Ratcliffe the ratter, Francis Lovell, mentioned explicitly, the dogger, and Richard III the hogger, an allusion to his heraldic standard. Collingbourne met a traitor's death, yet according to the Tudor historian John Stowe, he retained his humour to the very end. When his heart was removed and presented to him, he is said to have quipped with his last strength, "O Lord Jesus, yet more trouble." What is particularly intriguing is that Collingbourne placed Catesby first in his verse. This suggests the author assumed readers would immediately recognize Cat as Catesby, without needing further explanation or questioning his prominent position. A more detailed version with explanatory notes was published later, but in July 1484, only these two lines were circulated. William Catesby's rise to prominence was far from predetermined. He hailed from a modest Northamptonshire family whose early wealth came from cattle trading. By his generation, however, the family had shifted focus to the legal profession. Catesby's father, also named William, held significant roles, including Justice of Array and membership in several parliaments during the late 1450s. One notable parliament was the infamous Parliament of Devils, which sanctioned the administration of lands confiscated from Richard, Duke of York. Catesby's father was made a Knight of the Bath by Henry VI in 1449, reflecting his tight allegiance to the Lancastrian cause. This loyalty distinguished him from his brother John, who advanced his career under Edward IV. William Catesby, therefore, epitomized the complexities of the Wars of the Roses. A family divided by allegiance, with his father reconciling with the House of York despite his Lancastrian sympathies, while his uncle chose the opposite path. At this point, an important detail warrants attention. I have encountered conflicting information regarding the year of Sir William Catesby's death. The most widely cited year is 1470, but both John Smith Roskell and Malcolm Mercer argue for 1478 or 1479. This discrepancy arises from issues with the sources. Documents well beyond 1470 reference a Sir William Catesby. Since Richard's close advisor did not attain knighthood but remained an esquire, it is reasonable to assume these records refer to his father. However, James Gairdner, writing in the 19th century, contested this notion, suggesting that Richard's advisor had been mistakenly granted a title in the sources that he did not actually hold. Age offers no resolution to this debate. William Catesby, the subject of this discussion, was born in 1450. By the second reign, he was certainly old enough to match the descriptions in the sources. This ambiguity must be considered in any pre-1479 references to Sir William Catesby, as there is ongoing discourse about which William Catesby these documents describe. This distinction is significant because one of the two Williams supported the reinstatement of Henry VI in 1470, but later reconciled with the Yorkists. The prevailing assumption is that this individual was Sir William, but this would be impossible if he had indeed died in 1470. We know very little about William's childhood and youth. Just as his uncle John, William Catesby, did receive legal training at the Inner Temple. It remains unclear whether his father attended there as well, though it seems plausible. As a lawyer, William quickly established a thriving practice, representing prominent clients such as the Zouche and Scrope families. Charles Ross speculates that this work may have brought him to the attention of the future Richard III. William's connection to the Zouche family proved valuable in another way. He married Margaret, a daughter of the house. The couple had 3 sons. William's legal acumen earned widespread recognition, even from his detractor Thomas More, who wrote more than 30 years later. Despite his disdain for Catesby, More acknowledged his exceptional abilities. Besides his excellent knowledge of British law, he was a man of dignified bearing, handsomely featured, and of excellent appearance, not only suitable for carrying out assignments, but capable also of handling matters of grave consequence. More's remarks reflect the opinions of men who had known Catesby personally. King Edward IV also recognized his talents, employing him in numerous cases, particularly those involving land ownership disputes often tied to inheritance claims. Catesby's abilities also impressed William Hastings, Edward IV's close friend, who brought him into his service. It is said that Hastings strongly recommended Catesby to Richard, encouraging his inclusion in Richard's council. At first glance, it might appear that the Catesby family rose to prominence together. In reality, however, this was not the case. Although John and William Catesby were often entrusted with tasks jointly and served on the same commissions, John maintained a certain distance from his nephew. John Catesby held notable positions under Edward IV, serving as a royal sergeant-at-law from 1463. By 1481, he had been promoted to 3rd Justice of the Court of Common Pleas. Unlike his nephew, John appears to have avoided involvement in the intense political struggles of the period, preserving an impeccable reputation. A testament to his standing was Edward V's decision to confirm John in his judicial role almost immediately upon assuming the throne. This confirmation is documented in one of the few surviving documents that bear Edward V's signature. Richard III, in turn, reappointed John Catesby on the very first day of his reign, and even Henry VII reappointed him to the Court of Common Pleas after some deliberation. The fact that Henry VII trusted John Catesby, despite wanting his nephew executed, is well documented. John was not only tasked with the legal review of matters spanning the reigns of the 3 Yorkist kings, but also chaired a commission that assessed, among other things, William's possessions. This suggests that John maintained sufficient distance from William, who had fully committed himself to Richard's cause. The last recorded instance of uncle and nephew working together dates to June 28, 1484. Shortly afterward, the infamous lampoon followed, and there is an unprovable theory that John sought to distance himself from his nephew afterward, if only to avoid drawing the wrath of the Tudors upon himself. Let us return to the spring of 1483. At this time, William Catesby was officially in the service of Hastings, enjoying a high reputation with Richard and continuing to operate a lucrative law firm. His connections were already proving financially advantageous. Alongside Hastings and William Herbert, Catesby was regarded as one of 3 intermediaries through whom individuals, companies, and other interested parties could present their concerns to members of the royal family, provided they could afford the associated fees. Hastings appeared to place complete trust in Catesby. After Edward IV's death, Hastings advocated for Catesby's admission to the Privy Council of Edward V. The Woodvilles, notably, seem to have no objections to this. Their apparent trust is exemplified by Anthony, Earl Rivers. Just before his execution, ordered by Richard, Rivers prepared his customary will. Despite the circumstances, Rivers appointed Catesby as an executor of his last wishes. Another instance of Catesby's credibility is his involvement in a commission established on April 27, 1483, to address property and trade issues that arose after Edward IV's death. This commission, predating the events at Stony Stratford, included both John and William Catesby, with Hastings heading the group. One notable absence from this document is Richard's name. At this stage, Catesby was evidently not yet perceived as a political figure. His role was primarily seen as that of a skilled lawyer. This interpretation aligns with the broader impression of Catesby during this period. However, during Richard's bid for the crown, Catesby allegedly stepped away from his purely legal role. Speculation arose about his involvement in establishing a connection between Richard and Eleanor Butler, née Talbot. Richard used Butler's supposed pre-contract of marriage to Edward IV as a basis for claiming the throne. One blog post proposes a familial link between Catesby and Butler to support this theory. Eleanor's father, the famed John Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, had a younger sister, Alice. Alice married Sir Thomas Barre of Burford. They had a daughter, Joan or Jane, who married Sir Kinner de la Barre. After she was widowed, Joan would marry the widowed Sir William Catesby Sr., thus becoming our Catesby's stepmother. I am skeptical of this argument, but it is worth mentioning for context. More compelling is an accusation by Thomas More. Catesby is alleged to have been the one who persuaded Richard to break with Hastings. According to More, the Duke of Gloucester instructed Catesby to ask Hastings whether he would support Richard's claim to the throne. Catesby allegedly reported back that Hastings rejected the proposal with terrible words. This report supposedly led to Hastings' execution, a move seen as a murder orchestrated by Catesby, who ultimately inherited Hastings' title and fortune. While the inheritance is factual, the claim about Catesby's involvement is less reliable. According to Dominic Mancini, it was not Catesby but Henry Stafford, Lord Buckingham, who approached Hastings with Richard's request. Mancini was present at the time and well informed about the events, making his account more credible. Additionally, More, a lawyer himself, was notoriously critical of other lawyers with whom he disagreed politically, which casts doubt on his objectivity in this matter. Catesby's role in Richard's rise to power likely focused on legal matters rather than direct political machinations. On June 30th, 1483, he was appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer for life, effectively becoming the finance minister in Richard's government. As a member of Richard III's government, William Catesby held a position of such prominence that historian Michael Hicks described him as the face of the administration. His most significant role, however, was designed to counterbalance the monarch's authority. In January and February 1484, during Richard's sole parliament, Catesby was appointed Speaker of the House of Commons. In this capacity, he played a crucial part in securing the passage of key legislation, including Titulus Regius. Traditionally, Edward IV had worked with speakers independent of the government, underscoring the institution's autonomy. Richard, however, broke with this tradition, appointing Catesby, a loyal supporter, to the role. An explanation for Richard's choice can be found in the Crowland Chronicle, which describes Catesby and Richard Ratcliffe as advisors whose judgment the king held in the highest regard. Richard is said to have rarely contradicted them. This deep trust also saw Catesby entrusted with sensitive and high-stakes responsibilities. He played a central role in suppressing the Buckingham Rebellion and served on commissions tasked with identifying previously unknown participants. His prominence in these efforts highlights his significant social ascent under Richard's rule. Catesby's loyalty to Richard was not without material rewards. Michael Hicks calculated that Catesby earned £323 annually from grants bestowed by the king, a substantial sum at the time. However, Charles Ross, in his biography of Richard, questioned why the king did not distribute titles more generously among the nobility to secure broader support. Instead, Richard concentrated wealth and privileges among a small circle of close allies, including Catesby, who came from a relatively humble background. This strategy was partly shaped by the psychological impact of the Buckingham Rebellion. Richard grew increasingly distrustful, believing he could only rely on his northern supporters. This mistrust was compounded by personal losses, including the deaths of his son and wife, which left him politically and emotionally weakened. In response, Richard sought to bind loyal allies like Catesby to him through titles and wealth, aiming to secure their unwavering support and minimize the risk of betrayal. By the spring of 1485, however, this system was under strain. According to the Crowland Chronicle, rumors at court suggested Richard intended to marry his niece, Elizabeth of York. This was particularly problematic as Henry Tudor had publicly vowed to marry her, consolidating his claim to the throne. Facing mounting pressure, Richard made a public denial of these rumors. The source claims it was Catesby who strongly advised against the marriage, warning Richard with impressive words that such a union would alienate his northern supporters. Yet, even Catesby and Ratcliffe reportedly harbored doubts about the king's denial. Catesby also played a role in countering the Tudor threat. This involved commissions to raise troops. One notable commission, led by Francis Lovell and Catesby, was tasked on June 26, 1484, with mustering 1,000 archers under John Grey's command. Their mission was to travel to Brittany as swiftly as possible. Although Henry Tudor's name does not explicitly appear in the commission's records, the underlying objective was clear. At the time, Francis, Duke of Brittany, was unable to govern independently, and his treasurer, Pierre Landais, had promised Richard III to extradite the Tudors to England in exchange for 3,000 archers to defend Brittany from a potential French invasion. Catesby's task was to gather a third of these troops to seize the opportunity. However, the plan failed. Henry Tudor and his uncle Jasper managed to escape to France with other English exiles, eluding capture and continuing their preparations for an eventual challenge to Richard's reign. The fateful meeting with Henry Tudor was delayed until August 22, 1485. At the Battle of Bosworth, William Catesby stood by Richard III's side. Shortly before the Stanleys' pivotal decision to intervene on the opposing side, Catesby is said to have urged Richard to retreat, arguing that it was unnecessary to stake everything on a single battle. This time, however, Richard did not heed his advisor's counsel, with catastrophic consequences. Catesby himself chose not to fight. Instead, he fled the battlefield, abandoning the man he had served so loyally. However, his escape was short-lived. Henry Tudor's forces captured him the following day. Just 2 days later, Catesby knelt before the executioner. In his will, where he appointed his wife as sole executor, Catesby included a poignant line that has been quoted many times. "My lord is Stanley Strange and all that blood. Help and pray for my soul, for ye have not for my body, as I trusted in you." These words reveal his deep sense of betrayal by those he had counted on. Turning his thoughts to his family, who would now face life under a Tudor king, he wrote, "I doubt not the king will be good and gracious lord to them, for he is called a full gracious prince, and I never offend him by my good and free will. For God, I take to my Juge, I have ever loved him." Despite Catesby's hopes for the Tudor king's mercy toward his family, these expectations were largely unmet, with the exception of his relative John Catesby. On November 7th, 1485, Henry VII had Parliament pass a posthumous attainder for treason against Catesby, providing the legal grounds to confiscate his property in its entirety. Catesby's son George, incorrectly identified as John in some printed sources, was forced to fight for years to reclaim even a portion of the family's holdings. A lengthy petition from 1488 survives, shedding light on his efforts and offering a glimpse into the lasting consequences of William Catesby's fall. Henry VII pursued William Catesby with unwavering rigor, even after his death. The details found in various documents are intriguing as they reveal inconsistencies in how Catesby's actions were described. High treason is not always cited as the justification for Henry's actions. With the exception of records from 1492, this charge only appears in documents signed directly by Henry. In sources marked with P.S. for Privy Seal, there is no mention of treason at all. So what exactly did Catesby do to provoke Henry's sustained ire? Michael Hicks offers an explanation that, while insightful, feels insufficient. He suggests that Catesby represented the unacceptable face of Ricardian rule. However, Hicks's reasoning does not fully account for Henry's actions, nor does the notion that Catesby was the highest-ranking member of Richard's government to survive. John de la Pole, whom Richard likely designated as his heir, was still alive. Additionally, it cannot be explained by a general animosity toward the Catesby family. Henry confirmed John Catesby as a judge after just 1 month, and even placed trust in him. I believe Henry's motivations stemmed from 3 interrelated factors. Catesby's unpopularity. Among the nobility, as a man of low birth who rose through the ranks, Catesby was viewed as a social climber. By acting decisively against him, Henry could curry favor with the nobility who likely resented Catesby's rise. Catesby's betrayal of Lancaster, William's father, had supported the Lancastrian side, but Catesby himself aligned with the House of York. This shift may have appeared to Henry as an especially egregious betrayal. Catesby's knowledge of sensitive information. As a key figure in Richard's government, Catesby was privy to many secrets and the inner workings of Ricardian rule. While Henry may not have personally been troubled by his youthful exile, he surrounded himself with exiles who likely had grievances tied to Catesby's actions. This could explain why Catesby expected the Stanleys, mentioned in his will, to intervene on his behalf. There are other, more speculative claims about Catesby's fate that I do not find credible but mention for completeness. For instance, some suggest Catesby knew of an intimate relationship between Richard and Elizabeth of York, or that he held secrets about the fate of the princes in the Tower. However, the princes were not part of Catesby's known responsibilities, and the rumors about the relationship between Richard and Elizabeth is just wrong. Ultimately, I view Catesby as a careerist who gambled everything on his loyalty to Richard III and lost. He tied himself to Richard's fortunes, for better or worse, and paid the ultimate price. Finally, I want to take a moment to thank my channel members. Your support means a lot, and I'm incredibly grateful for each of you. To the rest of my audience, I appreciate you as well. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to support my channel.